Look out! Surging up from the depths of the sea.
Horrifying, mysterious creatures whose attack on people sends the whole countryside on an endless search.
Unless something is done and done quickly.
Is this the end of our civilization?
You'll pioneer with us the perilous descent into the unknown.
Yeah, what does that mean? What are you even talking about?
A deep, penetrating dive.
In the last calm and reflective moment, before the monsters came.
Humanoids from the deep dive.
Welcome to the podcast Humanoids the Deep Dive, where we dig deep into the meanings and context of your favorite monsters and monster movies. Each episode will see guests, co-hosts, and myself give our take on an important movie, monster, and or film and what we think it means, using everything from history and philosophy to films and folklore. Today we're celebrating the Man of Steel himself, Superman. Since his 1938 introduction, Superman has stayed one of comic history's most powerful heroes and a paragon of moral virtue, along with having one of DC's best bestiaries. So to celebrate James Gunn's forthcoming Superman film and the official start of DCU's Gods and Monsters chapter, I'm thrilled to talk about him. I'm your host, Jeff Ewing. I'm critic and entertainment journalist for Collider, that hashtag show, Inverse and Elsewhere. I've co-edited 2 books on monster media, Alien and Philosophy, Stranger Things and Philosophy, as well as having written book chapters on topics like the devil, hell, Cloverfield, Frankenstein, all sorts of stuff. If it's nerdy, if it has to do with monsters or folklore, I love it. I'm pleased to introduce our excellent guest for today's episode. Mike Roe has written for The Wrap, Vanity Fair, literally wrote the book on 30 Rock. I kind of want to book him for an episode on Werewolf Bar Mitzvah.
Well, maybe Halloween comes every year. That's the time I try to remind everybody, like, hey, I did this book. You should check it out. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Love that show though.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much for stopping by, Mike.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm, as much as I love 30 Rock, I think I'm an even bigger Superman fan. So I'm hyped to get to dive into his rogues gallery and take this little trip into the Phantom Zone.
I love that. I'm so excited. Given that this is a monster movie podcast, I thought it would be fitting to celebrate Superman first by celebrating his monsters. That's why we're doing this episode, and also kind of what he means as a character to us, how we got into Superman. I know that James Gunn is a big comic fan. That's one of the reasons I love his adaptations, because he really does dig into the lore. He's willing to get weird with it. Been a big fan of Slither and a lot of his other stuff.
My wife and I just watched, to get ready for Superman, we just watched Super for the first time, which I'd never seen. Very fun going back and looking at some earlier James Gunn before the Marvel stuff, and seeing him with, when he was still a little more edgelordy than he might be now. But it was fascinating.
Yeah, it's funny that you can like trace his arc as his hair has gotten wider, and now he's like wizened.
Exactly. He's like, I always look at his Threads account and he's always answering questions and replying to people.
I think that's really cool. Like, he's actually, he has so much responsibility now for DC,
yes,
but he's accessible, and that's rare. Shout out James Gunn. Would love to have you on the show and talk this and Slither and Starro and lots of things. I kind of wanted to talk about Superman first and foremost, celebrate the character getting a big screen return. Mike, how did you first become, because you were I love this, so excited to get a chat Superman. Tell me about why you love Superman so much and how you got into him.
Yeah, when I was, as many comic book folks, grew up a nerd, grew up, in the gifted classes and all that sort of stuff. And I had I remember when I was a kid, my dad got a bunch of used old Silver Age Superman comics and brought them home. I read those things till the covers fell off. I also read through that. I also read one of the first trades I ever had was the greatest stories ever told it was like the 1950s greatest 50s stories ever told. So when I was a kid, I got into the really modern comics. Well, modern comics for the time, time passes, but it was the death of Superman. It was like a big cultural moment. They killed off Superman, and as a kid, I was emotional about it. For years, I had an ad for that up on my wall in my childhood bedroom. It was like this article from the Costco magazine. I remember was talking about the death of Superman, and so I was like, Superman means so much to me. So yeah, lifelong Superman guy, and I'm excited to see. I've stuck with him through thick and thin, whether that be Brandon Routh or Henry Cavill, and now we got David Cornsweet. So we'll see how it goes. I even I was there through Dean Cain as a kid, and
Yeah.
been bummed out about his recent political turn. But
Same.
before I knew about that, I did get my wife a cameo from Dean Cain. So
That's funny. What are you going to
the
do?
the thing that I think I identify with though is that like I am part Hawaiian, and Dean Cain's like the only like he's like half Japanese, so I appreciate that there was like a slightly non-white Superman out there, and even though they didn't like it wasn't like how he's represented, but I think that's something that's really powerful, and maybe helped me as a kid who wasn't just like straight white kid get into Superman when I was a kid. But like it bums me out that he has gone in a direction sort of trying to go against all of that.
Yeah, I get that. And I understand like the importance of representation in that way too, because like I'm bi, and when they announced
Mm-hmm.
that like Jonathan Kent is going to be canonically bi in the comics, I'm like, oh my God, that's huge for someone that grew up loving Superman and didn't have a lot of role models culturally to understand myself for a long time. That would have been so huge because I grew up loving Superman. I think it's interesting. So my kind of a similar backstory. As I mentioned to you before we started recording, I love comic book media growing up. I watched, Tim Burton's Batman. I watched the Superman original films. I loved all that stuff. But on my way to our gifted classes back when I grew up, my buddies and I would trade comic books at the back of the bus. And the first one that I remember reading, the first big one, was The Death of Superman. And it was such a cool and immersive story. The covers burned into my brain of the morning, Lois holding the dead hero. I loved the world without a Superman-y stuff where it was like Eradicator and Steel and all these other versions. I just thought they were doing such cool things. And from that moment on, I just kind of loved Superman my whole life. So yeah, this is a real treat.
I was gonna say, speaking of like Superman and representation, I mean, that's what he's always been about. Like going back to Siegel and Schuster creating him, like, there are a couple of Jewish kids in New York when,
Mhm.
and created this character who's sort of like a, Caucasian white embodiment in some ways, but at the same time
Good
has the
old boy
Jewish story
from
behind him of like, it's very like symbolic Jewish culture, like sort of like really a Moses story of his origin, and they were able to put themselves into this iconic character.
yeah, and this like transplant to America. And I think it's also interesting too because he's, I mean, he's not of the world, and there's constant tension with the US government because he grew up in the States attempting to pigeonhole him as an American hero. But he always sees himself as a global hero that's beyond borders. Whoever needs help is who needs help, right? And it's it's this inherent rejection of nationalism despite being truth, justice, and the American way. And I love
Yeah,
that
it's
so
been it's been
much.
so interesting seeing them try to pull back from truth, justice, and the American way over the last decade or so in comics, and try out different slogans for him. And
Yeah.
I think truth, justice, and a better tomorrow is where they landed most recently.
Yeah.
Um, and but like there is something inherently American about him. Like I remember reading The Dark Knight Returns as a kid, and you had Superman working for Ronald Reagan as the sort of big bad of that comic, and it's there's a very interesting tension in there with
Hmm.
and like how Superman represents our times. He is an alien from another planet who's come to our Earth and is becoming like a figure of worship to some extent.
I think it's also funny too because we're also on the eve of my apologies to the fine folks at Warner Brothers for mentioning a different competing comic property, but I think it's so funny that the Fantastic Four movie's coming up, and folks stay tuned. I'm going to be doing an episode on that as well. But I love that like these arch nemeses like Lex Luthor and Doctor Doom. I mean, they're very different. It's not one of those cases where like one's clearly copying the other, but they do have funny similarities in the sense that they're both like monomaniacal, like wealthy people that make green huge suits to like combat superpowered individuals,
They're both
uh
super geniuses.
super
So
geniuses.
it's like, I
And
mean,
both
if Lex got into magic, that's probably he probably ends up like Doctor Doom.
absolutely right. And he could have, he just, didn't feel like it. And then both of them have some comic book like origins for their arch villainy connected to very superficial issues. One of Luther's canonical origin stories for why he's so mad at Superman is that Superman accidentally caused his baldness. It is the most superficial, stupid thing ever. And that's not always the explanation. But then you also have like Doctor Doom, who's like, oh, I got like a small scar on my face. And so I'm going to cover my body in metal forever, even when I get omniscient powers and not fix it and still do the metal thing. Like, all right, buddy, you could have just gone to therapy. You had the money.
I
Like,
mean, there are times where like my darker side is like I want to like hold a grudge, and
yeah.
I think that it's we have to listen to our better natures not to, or you end up like
Mhm.
Doctor Doom always being like Richards, Luther and his hatred for Superman. I mean, that's one thing I always loved. I thought that it was such a beautiful idea in the Smallville TV show to have like Clark and Lex as like besties basically, and have that friendship be something that goes awry. And it was like seeing like these villains have like you're like, oh, things could have been so good, you could have been allies and saved the world, but like because of your darkness you can't. And it's something I always think about with like looking at real world politics and stuff, and thinking about guys who could do so much good for the world and then just don't. So
Mhm.
it's very relatable to our real experience.
Absolutely. Like I would literally always tell people about like this concept I have called like the fiction of a useful billionaire, right? We have all these fictional characters, especially in comic books, like Tony Stark or like Batman, who are like billionaires, but they use it for good and they invent things, they fight crime, they protect the world. I'm like, oh, well, give someone unparalleled wealth. And what do they actually do with it? Elon Musk runs a social media account into the ground for the lulz.
R.I.P. Twitter.
It's just such a funny thing. Like wealth and power don't attend virtue, they can. It can absolutely happen. But
It's
there's nothing
true.
about having that level of power that's going to produce heroism.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, it's also why the Bible says like it's harder for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven than it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. So
yep.
there's people have known for a long time that there's something
Uh-huh.
strangely corrupting about wealth. It's not just our current late stage capitalism.
Yep. Absolutely. I wanted to take a moment to review James Gunn's DCU starter Superman. When I recorded the rest of the episode, it was before I'd actually screened the film. I say that at some point during the episode. I kept it in for flow. Now I've seen the film, and here are my thoughts. David Cornsweet is a great Superman. His interpretation of the character, the way that it's written, is more petulant. He's an experienced hero, but still early career Superman, so he's figuring out how to balance crises, how to respond to them appropriately, but he's well meaning. I think David has a great command of the character. It's a very likable, very admirable, very hopeful interpretation, and I loved it. Rachel Brosnahan, excellent Lois Lane in terms of performance. I think that she has the gravitas, she has the drive and the tenaciousness that Lois should have on screen. Nicholas Hoult is a solid Lex Luthor. He is at his best when Lex's thin veneer, the facade of control, is eroding and he starts to get more emotional towards the end. That's the most interesting, moment for the character. And Holtz pulls it off so well. But I have to say, two characters in particular sort of steal the film. First, Krypto the Superdog is adorable, so much fun. You can look forward to seeing the pup in Supergirl. And secondarily, Eddie Gathegi steals the show as Mr. Terrific. He's so good in every scene that he's in. There's a lot of humor that's subtle in his character work. It's a very serious character, but he pulls it off so well. Great addition to the universe. It makes me sad that we haven't seen Mr. Terrific 1,000 times on screen before, but I look forward to whatever properties he shows up in next. I think Gunn's writing here, it's pithy, it's fun. He's good at quick-paced things. I love that the film starts after 300 years of people knowing about metahumans, that it doesn't waste any time. There's not this, long story of a baby being born and landing in a spaceship and then being raised and all this other stuff. So it takes so long for the film to even get started. There's none of that. We enter the world where Superman is an adult. He has just lost his first fight after, yay many years of heroism. And all these things have already, heroes have been in the world, villains have been in the world, all these things have been happening, and it's kind of just a feature. I think that's such a smart way to start in the middle of things. It's great for world building. There's so many moving parts already that the DCU can benefit from, and different storytelling avenues that are available, and I think that's a smart way to approach it. Gunn's writing is funny. It definitely feels like a James Gunn movie. If you like that, I do. There's some great action sequences that utilize the various players' powers and abilities well. You get a lot of heroes already out the gate, which I think is pretty cool. Decent villain representations as well. Not much different from what you see in the trailer. So there are surprises, but you kind of know what to expect. There's a cool kaiju. There's Ultraman. There's the Engineer. There's all these other super powered baddies, and in that regard, you if you've seen the trailers, you can come in knowing what to expect. I think they're all well utilized. And altogether, it's a fun, high energy interpretation of this world of Superman. He's very hopeful as a character, which he should be. I think Gunn really understands Superman and what makes him tick, and it translates well to the screen. And Cornsweat does a great job. I think Superman fans are going to, by and large, be happy. You should definitely give it a chance, because I think it's a very well-grounded and solid interpretation of the character in the world that really gets the comic book tone of Superman. And I had so much fun with Krypto. I had so much fun with all these different elements. It looks great. I think Superman fans will be really happy. There are a couple things that, for me, knock it down a peg or two. Altogether, and I rarely say this about films anymore, but I think it moves a little too fast. It's great that we were thrown in the middle of this world. That works pretty well. But between scenes, there's a number of moments that could benefit from being fleshed out a little bit more, being slowed down, having a little more space between them. It's really just going and going and going and going, but there's complicated things happening, so we don't spend enough time on a few of them to really let things land as well as they could. Some individual plot points could use honing. It's not really clear, for example, why the government is cool with certain things that Lex does at certain points. Luthor is given ever-shifting motives for his hatred of Superman. At one point, he puts it in the broader context of basically his own ego at some points, and other points he's talking about how like Superman's kind of an affront to humanity because why is the best of us an alien? What does that say? Then he has selfish motives too. It's just a lot of ever-shifting elements, and they're not inconsistent, but I would like to see a little more time with Luthor for clarity's purposes, because we just enter with him hating Superman for a long time. Why? It'd be nice to explore that a little bit more clearly. I also think it's interesting that the U.S. government seems altogether a little bit too cool with metahumans. I understand that if metahumans have been known for 300 years, that would fundamentally change how the U.S. government's always operated. But have you met have you heard from anybody in the U.S. government? They have a fetishism over the monopoly of control and power. So I feel like they treat Superman in too hands-off a way than they probably traditionally would. Some certain individual elements could use introductions. So, for example, Hawkgirl is murdering folks, and she's a seasoned reincarnating warrior, so that makes sense. But it kind of portrays her as a flying, sort of petulant young woman with anger issues. We don't have many opportunities to actually see why she is the way she is. Same goes for Guy Gardner and a lot of these other characters. We introduce them when they've already been doing their shtick. And for those of us who read the comics and are very familiar with them, that's fine. We can fill in the blanks. It's certainly consistently written. But for someone whose only experience of these characters is, their on-screen portrayals, it would be nice to have a little bit of other information about them at all. Final thing is, I think Superman is well written overall and very well portrayed. It was a great casting choice, but he's written a little bit inconsistently. There's one scene, for example, where he's dealing with certain events, to not spoil anything, and a big fight between the Justice Gang, or whatever you want to call them, and something is happening behind him, and he doesn't see it. And then Lois comes to have a conversation about what's been going on with him personally, with that thing happening in the background, and he's so distracted he doesn't see it. So that's great. Actually, it's a really great piece of comedy that works to watch this big fight going down behind him, and he's just focused on his feelings. I really like that, actually. But then he notices it happening, and he just kind of waves it off and has this like intimate moment with Lois talking about what's been going on. That's totally fine. But this version of Superman wouldn't do that. Like, this version of Superman would, as written, every time he gets his ass handed to him, he gets up, and as soon as he's healed, he goes back into the fray. He literally never turns down an opportunity to try and save people or protect people. So for him to just kind of wave it off, even if he's going through stuff, it's not what this version of the character would do. All those little gripes aside, I think Gunn's Superman is a fun superhero film that starts the DCU out on a high note. Cornswood is an excellent Superman. Gathegi, Krypto, steal the show. I really look forward to seeing more from Brosnahan in this world. I look forward to seeing more Hawkgirl, more Lanterns, the show coming up. I'm Really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be an excellent time. I think Gunn nailed it for the most part. It's a excellent addition to this wonderful history of Superman films, and you should definitely check it out. I know everyone always says on the big screen possible, but it's gonna look great in IMAX and Dolby in a premium format. Check it out. Hope you love it. I'd give it 4 Supermen out of 5. Now back to the show. So getting to the monster of it all, I think Superman's also really cool because DC in general, and I'll probably end up doing more DC shows because I love lanterns. I love so much about this world, and there's such cool, interesting concepts. But Superman has such a diverse bestiary, very cool, a lot of powerful and original things. There's cyborgs, there's alien warlords, there's sentient gas villains, the weirdest stuff. So cool.
What up,
Very nice.
chemo?
We might throw in at least like one chemo nod at the end if we don't otherwise get to it. I'm thrilled to talk about it. I think, Mike, anything in the bestiary you want to talk
Yeah.
about?
I mean, in this like a bad guy draft, if we will, I'm gonna pick number one on my list is Doomsday. I mean, he's the guy who successfully killed Superman, which is very impressive. That's from that Death of Superman story. He's just this unstoppable force. It's like the classic unstoppable force, immovable object thing. And they did such a great job building him up. They had for like a month, you saw like this weird hand punching through something, like trying to escape. And eventually you realize it is Doomsday. When he first shows up, he's wearing like this like green bodysuit. And
With
so
these goggles.
yeah, he's got the goggles. It's like, and then you finally realize he's being like sort of imprisoned in this thing, and it was like him breaking out, and then like eventually you get to see he's like this gray, craggy, Hulk-like monster with like all these like spikes shooting out everywhere, and then like as he goes on, Superman like first Doomsday just crushes the Justice League. Like I'm a pro wrestling fan, so I always like looking at like how that type of storytelling applies. It's like, you let the bad guy beat up some disposable good guys to make him look good, and then he gets to take on Superman finally after going through and like just ravaging like Booster Gold and all these characters, and I remember like he wrecks Booster Gold so bad that like he destroys his like suit that he gets his powers from. He has to go in like a weird robot suit after this. And like I'm just like, yeah, it's like Doomsday just tears apart everyone and then like has an epic fight. It's like an epic boxing match where Doomsday and Superman go at each other until they're both just taken out. And it's like a really rip-roaring fun. I think it still holds up for the most part. I think there's fantastic art from the time. I think that, it's not exactly the same as like modern comic art, but like I remember for years I really hated when I was a kid, I hated John Bogdanove, who did like very like blocky style artwork, and then going back to that, I'm like, oh, this is the good stuff. This is like fantastic, like, creative, different art. And there's like some really interesting stuff going on in the work back then too.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's also like so conceptually interesting because like so Doomsday was created, of course, for this comic arc. They're like, we need something that can kill Superman, right? And also challenge Superman's no kill effective rule, right? And so like, well, his main thing is, other than being extremely powerful, is whatever kills him, he just, he started as canonically this child in ancient Krypton that was experimented cruelly on and just killed and cloned and killed and cloned in this most terrible thing you could do to an entity, and just became this unstoppable, self-regenerating killing machine, basically full of hate and destruction. And because of this backstory, and so you have to take him down in increasingly creative ways, essentially, because he'll resurrect immune to whatever killed him last time. So it's a challenge to Superman. It's incredibly powerful, and I don't know. I feel
And he
like
also has like a
it's
kryptonite effect too. Like because he's
Mhm.
got like basically kryptonite in his bones. So it's
Yeah.
yeah.
And then all those bone protrusions that can like they have like Muay Thai elbows cutting an eye. No, he
Uh-huh.
has like actual like kryptonite bone blades. Very cool creature. One of the coolest in all comics, I think. I'm glad you mentioned it.
Dan Jurgens, what a goat. He's just, he wrote The Death and Return of Superman. He was like the hot writer and artist of the time when this was coming out. And then like came back later and he was writing Superman, and he brought in like the modern version of Superman into like the whole father son thing that he started doing. And his career lasted decades because he could just always find a good superhero yarn to tell.
So I feel like I have to rep my boy Starro. Starro, the Conqueror, first appeared in The Brave and the Bold number 28. We have recently seen, thanks to James Gunn, a pre-DCU beautifully rendered giant adaptation of my boy, Starro the Conqueror, in the Suicide Squad. I was so thrilled. I literally never thought. I always loved Starro because the design is so cool. The concept of this intergalactic starfish-like being that has psychic powers and can mind control entire civilizations easily is so weird and Lovecraftian in a way. Uh, it's bonkers. And if you had told me as a kid that there would be a large blockbustery Starro adaptation that's faithful to the comics, I would have said you were a liar. So, um,
Yeah, I love how far we've come in comic book media that we can bring in bring in Starro as a villain, that we can bring in things that people used to, who weren't used to comic movies would say like this is too silly, and we've gotten away from everyone having to have leather costumes, and we're
yeah.
able to do stuff like this, and it's exciting. I know that there's a lot of talk about like superhero burnout, etc., but I think that it's just a burnout on bad superhero movies
Hmm.
and projects. I think that I've been so excited for the Superman movie. I've been like, it's like a summer of hope. I'm telling people like we got like big hopeful Superman movie. We have a probably tragic Fantastic Four movie on the way. We
Yep.
are have like these like really inspirational heroes. I think is something that we need in this moment, and I'm excited to see who the villains are that they're going up against. I know that's
Yep.
I love Starro. I always think of him more as a Justice League villain, but it was really when
Sure.
Superman was leaving the Justice League in those days because you had because of the weird time stuff, you had Superman as like a founding member of the Justice League in various versions,
Right.
and yeah, I always love seeing Starro and just the idea of like he can send out little versions of himself that control your
Mhm.
mind. Always, I was like, that's just a terrifying thing, and it's quite like the big bad to have.
Absolutely. And then you have like entire waves of people with these little starfishes attached to their face looking at you.
Yeah, they
Um,
they gave out like Starro masks at Comic-Con a few years back, and I still have
so
mine
cool.
of that. I love those things. It's yeah.
I think it's great. Yeah, I agree that he is probably more of a Justice League villain because he's more of a Justice League level threat. It's so funny because so Starro was the first JLA, if my notes are right, the first JLA villain. And you would think it's one of those old comic, like, well, they were coming up with silly stuff. All right, what can challenge the Justice League? Here's the thing. But he's actual persistent apocalyptic level threat that also sometimes not a villain, which is interesting because there's so many dark things in the corners of the DC universe that I just think it's such a cool idea. It's original.
Yeah, I remember Scott Snyder, I think it was introduced the like Starro Jr. or something like that,
Yeah.
and it was a very cute little idea because like like a starfish seems like something that should be cute and cuddly and
Yeah.
fun, and instead he like takes over your mind, and it's terrifying, and especially like anything at that size. It's like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was scary because he's
Yes.
a giant thing. It's like the same thing with like a giant starfish.
Yeah, it's a
It's like,
weird
oh yeah,
kaiju,
that's bad.
Like
Yeah, exactly.
I will say that I am glad that they are not folding in the Suicide Squad to the DCU officially for one specific reason. I was very sad when Starro died. I was actually very, very, especially that Starro is very sad, you know, like he was a constantly experimented on being. Like he gets a good send off where it's kind of emotional.
I mean, a little common in common with Doomsday in that way, the whole like
Mhm.
experimented on thing, and giving a villain like a little bit more depth that way. Like, how do you give a giant starfish some depth? And they did it.
Exactly. Do I agree with their actions? No, but do I get it? That's like one reason why I know there's tension between like, what became of the Snyderverse and with the new direction that the universe is going. I always really liked Man of Steel, even the stuff that was like, trumped up controversy on the internet, you know, with him dispatching Zod. I think that was a really well set up moment. For me,
Yeah.
like my Superman, I never really bought the whole like, well, he's just a goody little farm boy, so he doesn't kill. I think that that's kind of a weak explanation, you know? Because like lots of people from the breadbasket of America are soldiers when the time comes and do what needs to be done in World War II and other situations. And I think it's a pretty weak explanation. But in Man of Steel, to have him in a situation versus another Kryptonian that is genocidal and well written because he was literally bred to preserve Krypton and it's the only way he can see to do it. It's a strong motivation for a villain, even if it's crazy and genocidal, right? It's well written. So to put Superman in a position where he has to kill Zod, it's the only way in the moment he can see it achieving, you know, the protection of Earth, and then it traumatizes him and he never kills again. That is a way better executed, I think, explanation for his rule.
Yeah, I think that there were so many things in the Snyder movies that like needed just like they gave too much time to some things and didn't give other
Uh-huh.
things the time they needed to breathe. And
Yeah,
I think that
yeah,
there are ways you could have gone at that moment and made it really hit. And I think it's just sort of like Superman just comes back from it too quickly. Like you don't get
sure.
a moment to sit with him in that. But I think that it's a great motivation. And I think that like the thing about Superman that makes him special is that he is always, he's trying to do the right thing. He
Yep.
is trying to save the most lives. And the idea is like he's going to find a way. But like I think that that was a great example of him like having to choose the lesser of two evils and like how much that pains his soul and like
Right.
the way like Henry Cavill did that's probably one of the peaks of his performance is having to
Totally.
show the pain of Zod and like I think there's so much that's great and tragic in like having to face like these remnants of his own homeland and
Right.
it's a really powerful story. Like, Zod, I mean, there's a reason why they used him again, even after him being in the original Superman movie back in the
Yep.
day, because there's something, exciting and interesting about him fighting other Kryptonians. I always think that
Absolutely.
like that those make for good challenges and like it's one thing I've always loved is like the Phantom Zone, like the zone where they send Superman bad guys. It's for punishment, and it's in a way it's like worse than death. They sort of the way they depict it,
Hmm.
and there's so many good moral tales. Like I mean, it's a thing they did in the comics too. Superman did execute Zod, a version of Zod with kryptonite, had to give him sort of a death penalty, and it was, but then like it led to in the comics he went and exiled himself into space and had to like wrestle with his morals. He grew a beard. He had to figure stuff out.
Yeah, and I feel like that's because the thing is like I mean the whole point of Superman is that he's this being of godlike power, but he's a man, you know, like he's a person. It's not innate moral perfection. He's just striving to be a good person, and he doesn't have to be perfect. He just always has the right motives because life is hard and the decisions at this level are difficult unless Starro's controlling your brain.
Yeah, I mean, it would be very easy for Lex Luthor to be right, for him to be the monster, for him to be Zod. Like, he could have been the guy who decided to, use those powers for ill, but he ends up making the right choices. That's always like when they do these alternate Elseworld stories about Superman. That's what always stands out is, Superman can very easily be a monster, but, they always sort of like have like the like there was one where he lands in Russia and becomes like a communist
Yeah, Red
superhero and
Sun.
Exactly, Red Sun. That's the I was looking for the word sun. I was like red. I know it's red something. And I think
The
that
villain is
there
bourgeois
is
America.
exactly, exactly, and like figuring out like how do you depict him in these different ways? Like how much of it is innate? How much of it is they always go back to like how much is like the Kents raising him, and there's and then like you see other versions of the character where it's not like just Superman's biology. Like you have Cyborg Superman, who is a villain and who is
Hmm.
one of the worst ever. You have like all they introduced one of my favorite obscure villains is Conduit, who was like grew up alongside Superman in Smallville, but isn't good. Like he's
Hmm.
you can grow up in the like heart of America, you can have all this stuff. You're not necessarily going to be a good guy.
Right.
But Superman shows what's possible there.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the is Conduit the next monster you want to or character you want to discuss,
Do
or
a
what do
quick
you
run
feel?
of Conduit. He's like a minor villain. He was started out as a kid, Kenny Braverman. He was born the night that Superman crash landed into Smallville. He's another Smallville kid. He gets infected by green kryptonite and becomes a sickly child. And then all through his childhood, Clark Kent is always one step ahead of him, doing better in school, getting the girl, like him and Lana. And it's like it's you sort of see like Superman could be seen as kind of a bully, like in some ways. Like
Hmm.
he's like he's doing things all like out of like this farm kid nice thing, but like a kid who isn't getting the same things even Clark's getting. He's like this jerk, this guy, and then when he finally figures out. He's like the one of the only Superman villains who like makes the connection and realizes Clark is Superman, and he's like this guy like he creates like I also love like his villainy. He ends up like making this whole big like spy agency type thing and becomes like a villain just all to go after Superman. Like it's like a bunch of like goons he has that are just there to take Superman out. He like embraces his kryptonite powers and ends up poisoning himself worse, so he's still dying of like kryptonite poisoning.
Wasted by his own
Um,
petard.
Exactly. I mean, that's always the best villains. I mean, it's the same thing happened to Lex Luthor. Like they ended up having to kill off like one of his like he died in the comics based on kryptonite poisoning, but just had to put his brain in a new body and
Hmm.
keep going. But yeah, like I like Conduit just because it goes back to Smallville, and I feel like they're like Lex Luthor, they've had him be part of Smallville, they've had him not over the years, like they've gone back and forth on his origin, but it was a really fun way of bringing that back and having it go back to, it's not just either Krypton or Metropolis, like
Yeah,
there's something evil and dark in Smallville too.
I dig that. For a monster proper, do you have another one that you'd like to chat
Yeah,
about?
I mean, I one that has not been depicted in mainstream movies that much, Brainiac. I think that Brainiac is one that is, when I was a kid, like the two main like Silver Age bad guys for Superman, it was like always Lex and Brainiac, often teaming up with each other.
Yep.
And I always love, and I think Brainiac's a cool monster too because he always has such cool designs, and they
Absolutely.
sort of refined him over the years. There's like the green skinned one that has like a weird crown thing on his
Yeah.
head, and then you have like I remember the toys and the version when I was growing up was like the superpowers toys were like they had like a android robot Brainiac that was just
Hmm.
all circuit boards and like clear skin and stuff.
Awesome ship.
Yeah, awesome ship. His had a skull ship. Like that's
Yes,
the coolest. Like how
I
come
want a
there's no
skull ship.
skull ship toy? I want a skull ship toy.
Yeah, I would
Uh
absolutely have a skull ship toy on my wall.
Yeah, I would rock that. Like there is, I always thought that was such a cool design. It kind of bummed me when they went back to more traditional versions of him. But they always did interesting things, and they've used him on the TV shows a number of times.
Mhm.
And I think that Brainiac is interesting because it's like, it's sort of like a great juxtaposition against Superman's humanity. It's like,
Mhm.
what is somebody who is a very powerful alien? What happens if you take away the humanity, if you have him be obsessed with knowledge. And really, it's an indictment of comic book fans because he's a collector. He's somebody who
Yes,
wants to collect cities and
at any
knowledge
cost.
from around the universe. And, I'm sure there are writers over the years who are like, yeah, let's stick it to those fans, these stupid collectors. And it was. it's a real dark story. I mean, I remember as a kid, I always thought the coolest thing was the bottle city of Candor.
Me
Like
too.
Brainiac took the city and put it in a glass bottle and shrunk everybody down. And like one of Superman's like yeah, it's one of those other things that Superman just can't get over is he can't figure out how to save these people. How does he bring them, make them full size? He has to like wrestle with this in his Fortress of Solitude as he figures out like I need to save these people. These are from my home planet,
Hmm.
and I can't do it. They're stuck like this because of Brainiac. I'm not good enough to bring them back. And I always think that but he's not going to give up because that's another thing about Superman is like he's always going to keep trying to save those people. No matter how hopeless or futile it may seem, because he's always going to keep going.
Absolutely. And folks at home, it's fun because when I do these Monsters of episodes with a kind of list of things, I never really ask for what a guest's list is going to be because I like the surprise. Because there's always a lot of good answers. And I'm so glad that you mentioned Brainiac because Brainiac's been probably I always love Starro, but my favorite like arch villain has been Brainiac. I mean, Luther's classic and a great character, but I always just thought there was something like so menacing about this like advanced alien intelligence, this AI that's always coming back, that's always like two steps ahead, that's one of the smartest beings, if not the smartest in the universe. And I think it's cool because Brainiac, in addition to having great design, this very different character from Ultron, despite both being like AI intelligences that have different motivations, different histories. They look and act and their villainous plans are different. Ultron wants is genocidal versus Brainiac wants to accumulate all knowledge and will destroy everything. So it's the only thing that has that in reality. But the reason why I bring them up together is because it does share one trait that makes him really giant threat that Ultron also has, which is he is always coming back and improving himself. And there are subsequent there's always like a new and increasingly dangerous iteration of Brainiac. Um, so you can't really ever fully destroy him, and that makes it for such a good and menacing, complicated entity. And there was even one that was good. There was like one that was an ally to Earth's heroes because when you're dealing with a constantly evolving one, there's different iterations.
Yeah, I also love the idea that like so many robot villains, like part of their villainy is like, oh, they want to be more human. They want to do something that sort of makes them, Ultron, that's sort of like especially in the movie version, like he's sort of trying to figure out like how do I become a more full being?
You're
While
like, what
Brainiac's
am
like
I
the opposite
even?
of that. He doesn't care. He cares not for being more like any of these like little peon
Hmm.
subjects. And like speaking of different iterations, like there's like they had like Brainiac 13 was a version they introduced. I remember as a kid reading Legion of Superheroes and like one of the team members is Brainiac 5 and you're like, "Wait a second. How is this the fifth Brainiac? Where are these other like who are 2 through 4? Like what's going on?" I love details like that in comics where you're like I want to know all the story behind this, but you just drop stuff in and it makes
Yep.
the world feel really full and lived in that way.
I would be so surprised if Gunn doesn't eventually give us like a good Brainiac adaptation.
Yeah,
Uh,
I've been very surprised. Like I know that I think Brainiac was the villain in Kevin Smith's failed Superman
uh,
adaptation. Like I read the script for that years ago and it was fascinating to see but how he's trying to bring that to the screen. I think it was like I'm guessing the reason why you've never had a really good Brainiac is just because of that inhumanness to him. I think that is a hard thing to get like a big actor to want to play and like
hmm
to be able to bring that to life in a way that isn't just either having to be too robotic or
Yeah.
but yeah, I agree the same thing. I know a lot of people were speculating like who's the villain going to be in this Superman movie before it came out, and there was a lot of people wondering like, oh, Brainiac BX. Like, we see like sort of this space invasion type stuff
Yep.
happening, and I think that there's probably going to be, like you said, at some point James Gunn's going to give that to the fans.
Yep, I think so, 'cause especially because he has such respect for comic lore. Love Brainiac, so cool. I'm gonna mention two real quick because they're really small villains, and there's so obvious reasons why I'm pairing them, I think. One of them, so Superman obviously has been a prominent character since 38. And so there's been a lot of one-shot baddies, and there's been a lot of big arch villains like Doomsday or Darkseid or Brainiac, but there's also been a lot of little weird ones. And sometimes you get the best monsters with those weird little one or two shot beasties. So I wanted to mention first Skyhook. Uh,
Nice, nice.
Thank you. I saw that Blaze was on your list.
Uh-huh.
First appearing in 1988 Superman Volume 2, number 15, Skyhook was a criminal slash child abductor, murderer, Alistair Hook in London, who was caught, is very Freddy Krueger-esque origin story. He was caught by angry citizens and burned alive in a devil worship chapel that he had utilized. And the demon Blaze turned him into a demon, and 100 years later, he's plaguing Metropolis. Turned into like he has supernatural physiology, he has claws, he's back to his child murdering ways, but also turning kids into like able to turn them into demons as well as he was turned into a demon. So it's this weird, almost Oliver Twist Fagany sort of thing where he's corrupting youths with a
Corrupting
little bit
youths. I
of a
love a villain
splash
who
of
loves to corrupt youths.
kind of like an inverse Batman. I always joke, and maybe Warner Brothers will hate me for this, but like people say that Batman doesn't have a superpower, and that is not correct. And a superpower is not money. His superpower is he can throw an infinite variety of orphans at a problem.
Very true. It's,
And I
it's
wish that that weren't.
it's so funny like how like over the years they've tried to make it all make sense. Like how did he raise all these kids at separate times? But like they never really fully figured it out. I remember like Dan DiDio for years, the DC publisher wanted to kill Dick Grayson so you could just sort of quietly not talk about him anymore.
Like,
And
hey, let's just yeah, it's just that there's patterns. My brain can't help but see them. But so Skyhook's like an evil demon Batman in a way.
yeah.
And I think that's amazing and
I mean,
hilarious. Science.
like you said, like when you make like an evil, I mean, it's one thing I like. It's the reason why Blaze and Sadness were on my list is like they were around the same time, like leading up
Yep.
to the death of Superman. They were, secretly behind the scenes manipulating things. Like I think it was one of them was running the big magazine in town, News Time.
Mhm.
Was disguised as a human, as I think a Morgan Edge maybe, and there were different, Blaze and Sadness were sort of behind the scenes manipulating things. I just love the idea of like Superman having to fight all these villains, whether they're humans or aliens. But then when he goes up against magic, like he's weak against magic. That's
Yep.
always like a great weakness for him, like beyond kryptonite. And it's nice because it gives you like some other stuff to play with. I remember as a kid they did this whole Underworld Unleashed crossover where he fights Neron, who's like another version of the devil.
Yeah, Neron's
And
great.
I always like that you can see when he goes up against these supernatural villains, it's like Superman coming against something that he can't figure out exactly. Like it's
Yep.
not science based. There's so much like that's science fictiony about where Superman comes from. Like back in his origins, like he fights like a mad scientist was the early version of Lex Luthor before he became a businessman. There was the Fleischer cartoon shorts where he's fighting evil
Yes.
scientists mostly. And but when he comes up against magic, that's just like a whole thing that throws him off, that he sort of, you get Superman off balance, not really knowing what to do. I still need to finish reading this book, but like they did a book around the original Superman movie, Miracle Monday,
Okay.
with him fighting another devil like villain in it. And then like the reason they come up with the idea of Miracle Monday in that book is it's after Superman defeats this villain, no one remembers it anymore, but they knew something happened. It's sort of like the Crisis on Infinite Earths later, where they're like something's weird, and we know a good thing happened on this day, so they celebrate Miracle Monday every year because they know innately that there's some sort of something happened. And in this
It
case, it was
feels
Superman defeating the
vaguely
devil.
special.
Exactly, exactly. It was a miracle of some sort. Yeah, I always love like yeah, crazy giant universe crossover stuff and like Superman having to deal with magic. It's always fun to see how he finds a way into stuff when he has no magic powers. He like, you can see how he can deal with science, how he can deal with a monster, but when it comes to magic, Superman's like, I don't know, man.
Like I'm just gonna give it my best.
I was gonna say one thing that you touched on, like the whole Skyhook in some ways being a Batman, like in having this Batman element to him. I was gonna touch on some of the scariest Superman villains are when you have a dark Superman. Whether it's Bizarro is like this often a twisted clone that can be either good or
Hmm.
bad depending on the version of him, or Cyborg Superman who came after the death of Superman and is just like this horrendous genocidal monster who is ready to take out anything that Superman loves and take his place. Or also, I one comic I loved growing up was the big Eclipso crossover, where yet Superman gets possessed by Eclipso, and it's like
Hmm.
Superman possessed by his darker, angrier elements is a terrifying thing.
Yep.
So yeah, I always love them when they figure out like what would it be like if Superman wasn't so good, like if you
Hmm.
had this dark version of him.
Yeah, I think it's such a bit. That's also why like Superboy Prime is such like a great
I love Superboy
villain.
Prime.
Right, because it's like, what if you had like one that's like stronger than most Supermen, at least like base level, different set of weaknesses and strengths slightly, but just like a big axe to grind, tough, angry, younger asshole. Like,
Yeah, like it's how he deals with the same problem Superman had differently. Like Superman loses his home planet
Mhm.
and he grows up and accepts it and is able to try to make sure nothing like that happens to anyone ever again. Superboy Prime loses his home planet in the Crisis on the Infinite Earths, and his way of moving on from that is try to bring that world back. And try to kill anyone who gets in the way of that happening. He's
Mhm.
the immature, without the moral maturity of Superman, he'd be Superboy Prime. But
Yep.
is able to have that growth and that moral quality to him that makes him not become that dark self.
Absolutely. You just gave me like an epiphany because in the trailer so far, and I have not seen the new Superman film.
Ah,
As of this recording, I see it tomorrow. Um, so I don't know who is under the mask for Ultraman. And fun fact though, if you look at real closely at what images we've seen so far, the whole like green, like Ultraman is there's an image of him like in green stuff with like eye goggles. That's very like Doomsday coded, as we just talked about for Death of Superman. But what if it's the Brightburn kid?
I would love
Um,
that. Would love, I remember when I went to Comic-Con when they were supposed to be announcing, they were supposed to have a big panel for Brightburn, and it's right when people found James Gunn's tweets and he was getting canceled, so he ended up canceling the panel. And it was, it was such an interesting take. Like, James Gunn has been involved with like some real dark superhero stuff in the
yeah,
past, and it's interesting seeing the guy who like Suicide Squad and the edginess of Peacemaker, and now he's
yep,
doing Superman. And how does that voice transition there, I think is fascinating.
absolutely. Have you seen Superman yet, by the way, the new one?
I've not yet either myself. I'm going to a screening on Wednesday, but I'm
Sure.
not I've not yet seen the film, so I'm like who knows who's under that mask. I mean, I always Ultraman the name comes from, another dark Superman like you
Yep.
were mentioning, and it was the Superman from Earth 3 with the crime syndicate. It's like
Hmm.
a world where everything's flipped, where the good guys are the bad guys are the good guys. And you can see very much like I love Jeff Johns did like a reinterpretation where you had Ultraman like snorting kryptonite because it's like what gives him power and he's snorting it like a drug. And it's there you can see like what would be the worst, most dark version of this. And he's like sleeping with their version of Wonder Woman, who's like
Hmm.
a dark Lois. And
Yep.
it's there's like so many dark places you can go with Superman. And I think that it's um what makes Superman so powerful is that you have him being so good and so kind and so wonderful in the face of all those possibilities.
Absolutely. Any more monsters while we still have a little more time in
I
the
mean, we didn't talk much about this Bizarro. I just wanted to, mention like I always love reverse talking Bizarro. I always love hearing me love you, and I always think it's fun to play with. It's like such a silly thing, and like it's never consistent from one version of Bizarro to
No.
another, like about like whether he's just talking in a dumb way or did he talk like in
Yeah,
exactly
like, is he
reverse of real
stupid or is it
things.
just backwards.
then like there's like versions where he has his own planet that's like a cube,
Hmm.
and I think Bizarro is such a fun character, and like they've done a lot of different weird things with him over the years. He is one who I think is like so hard to do well in the live
Yes.
action version. I'd be curious if they ever do him on film. They've had like some takes, like they've done some takes in like the Superman Lois show and some stuff
Yeah,
on
the CW
TV.
stuff.
And it's kind of worked, but it's never been quite like the comic version.
Yeah. I think because
So
like comics are so larger than life and you can do such weirdness with them. Okay, being honest, Bizarro is the dumbest idea ever, which is
uh
also why I love it. Um,
yes.
it's
Yeah,
complete
it's
batshittery. And
yeah.
so you can't always translate that well.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's like a thing that works on the page because it's early on with those like reverse talking things. It's like what works in like dialogue boxes or
Yeah,
stuff he would like say stuff
right.
backwards, and like that works because you can read it backwards, but it's
And you
not
can
like a
have like
thing
a
that
little asterisk sometimes to translate.
exactly to translate him. And but yeah, like I think that but like again, there's something about like a dark Superman that's scary, and like
Yep.
there are versions of Bizarro that are scary, but generally he's pretty silly. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting one to see what they do with. And I was looking at my list of villains. I think those are the main ones I was concerned about. Like just a quick rundown of some other ones I like. Metallo, I think is interesting. Has a
Yes.
kryptonite heart.
Very
I
cool.
love like when Lex, like there's a comic where Lex like rips the kryptonite out of his heart so he can use the kryptonite, and Metallo's like dying, and it's like, yeah, that's a perfect Lex moment.
Hmm.
Um, we mentioned Darkseid. I always think Mongol's fun, and like
Yeah.
one of the most classic Superman stories ever. Just the what do you get for the man who has everything? And it's he puts Superman into this like mind brainwashed state where it's like what his life would have been if he did live on Krypton and grow up there and had a family. And Mongol like uses this space plant to make Superman have this vision. And then when he finally but Superman realizes this is wrong, and he has to say goodbye to like his son in this world, and he has to tear himself away from like this vision. And like Mongol is like this like brute force guy, but he is just like a sicko who will manipulate people like that.
Yep.
And I think that's always interesting with Superman, is like how does he face up to like just real sickness in bad
Hmm.
guys. Um yeah, I just always thought that was something that always stuck with me, and is they did a great adaptation then the animated series.
Yep.
And Mongol also was a great Green Lantern villain, blew up his
Yeah.
hometown. And I always think it's interesting seeing what they can do with that character. And they ended up like killing him off in the comics, but then they just were like, well, his son's the new
Yeah.
Mongol.
Yeah.
And
And even worse. He's even
yeah,
worse.
exactly.
I want to mention Chemo. This is one of the
Such a cool
weirder ones.
design. The coolest design.
It really is, though. Chemo came to us first in Showcase number 39, comic from 1962. So it began as a plastic vessel that this mad scientist was filling like chemical offshoot from his experiments in. Why? I don't know. Comic book reasons. So weird. And then he put this growth chemical in it, and it created this cocktail that turned alive. So it's artificial life that is this humanoid shaped vessel that can grow. It's super strong for reasons and full of toxic chemicals. So it's a real danger even to Superman. It's
But
just
he's
this
not
sentient
bad,
gas
right? He's
monster.
just moving through the world and
Yeah,
destroying stuff because he's a big giant who doesn't really know better and doesn't
right.
have
And
any
that can become
mind.
kaiju, not super smart because it's a sentient gas, but it's just a sentient gas monster. It's ridiculous. It's like the exact type of reason that character concept is the reason I wanted to start this show because this stuff is so creative and interesting and I love it so much.
Yeah, like I love in the Superman trailers for the movie, we've seen like Superman fights a big kaiju. He fights.
Yeah.
They have like the toys of the kaiju we see. There's been a lot of speculation. People were like, "Oh, is it going to be like Jimmy Olsen? Is there going to do other crazy stuff with him?" But I love just seeing. When Superman has to deal with a big monster, you get to see him just be Superman, just unleash, use his powers in cool ways, and not have to like hold back like he does against basically any humanoid.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think that those types of creatures, I think we're also gonna get was it Absorbing Man in
Yeah, it
the
sounds
new one?
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the one. It's not the only absorption based villain though. Parasite is a great one. Um,
Parasite's really good. Yeah, there's so many cool versions of Parasite too. Like it's like when someone can absorb Superman's powers, what does that do to them? What is Superman without those powers? What is a villain with those powers? It's always a fun one to play with. I
yep.
know Grant Morrison used him in his All-Star Superman story. Like
Yes.
that's a great version of Parasite,
Really
and
good
you're like,
adaptation.
this is creepy and gross, and
And this is why he's such
yeah,
a good villain. You know, he's not like an
exactly.
evil mastermind,
Hmm.
but kind of like Metallo, where he's a good complicating
Yeah,
muscle.
he would be a goon if he didn't have powers. Like
Yes.
like Parasite, he was a janitor at I think it was like Cadmus or something, and he got powers, and it's yeah, like what happens when you give an evil janitor superpowers?
Yeah. Right. Another one I wanted to mention that's a little one. Helgramite. All right. From Brave and the Bold number 80, November 1968. So this entomologist, Roderick Rose, as never do science on yourself, folks. It is a bad plan. He did science on himself, and it turned him into this grasshopper-esque insectoid with superhuman abilities. And he can, kind of like Skyhook can transform people into demons and does it just to kids. Um, Helgramite can transform others into insectoids that he can kind of control as this like dangerous insectoid army. Um,
Hellgrammite is terrifying.
yes.
It's not on my favorite list because I'm too scared of insects.
Ah,
It is
good
like an
reason.
actual scary, gross thing. Like, and Hellgrammites are a real type of bug. Like, it's a
Yes.
real thing. And like, it's
Yes.
just I was just looking at images of it just now. I'm like, oh God.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
a monster, and that's kind of great. Um,
yeah.
I do think it's cool. So for the folks at home, a Helgramite is termed for the larvae of a Dobson fly. So I love when you can tell the idea for like the origin story of the thing. Someone clearly just found out that that's called a Helgramite,
It's got the word hell in it.
and they're like,
It's
"That's a
yeah.
fucking cool name." Like,
Yeah, yeah,
take
yeah. That is
over.
a terrifying thing. I don't know what it is. If I hear Hellgrammite, that's just a great,
It's just a great.
whatever it is, I'm
That's my
scared.
current band name.
Yeah, exactly. You're into some real death metal. You gotta get some
Yes,
Hellgrammite. Hellgrammite.
folks, you've been listening to Helgramite. Um, it's just very cool, very very cool. Yeah, so we're I feel like that's such a good place to stop because we've talked about so many of my favorites. I love Brainiac, I love Doomsday. All these characters are so cool. Um, Mike, thank you so much for stopping by the show. It's been a blast
A
having you.
delight. Thanks for having me. Folks, follow me on social media. I'm at Mike Roe on Blue Sky and Twitter and most of the things. That's Mikeroe. And always happy to talk comics and superheroes and philosophy.
Absolutely. And folks at home, you know where to find me. You already did, but you can find my stuff all across the internet. You can find me here at Humanoids for the Deep Dive. We'll be doing a lot more episodes in our second season. I'm going to be bringing you a Fantastic Four episode coming up after this one. And thanks for stopping by. Check that out.
Once more, I'd like to extend a special thanks to our guests this episode and to all of you out there listening. From the dawn of recorded human civilization, we've been fascinated by monsters and the monstrous. They've inhabited our dreams and nightmares, they've been our protectors and our villains, they've symbolized our fears and vices, our hopes and potential. Fears of creatures and the night that nourishes them were key inspirations and fuel for the rise of human civilization, the need to get out of the shadows, behind the walls, and into the light. In many ways, understanding our monsters is an important part of understanding our world and ourselves. So thank you for taking this journey with us, we humanoids from the Deep Dive.